All right, guys. Hope you had a good break there. We are about to enter what is a very exciting subject. I know Mark really enjoys this as well as feedback from previous years. Is mind blowing math. This is on page 487. This will last about an hour, maybe just a little bit under an hour, and we'll take one more break after that before the final session of day 4 of the 2022 Master Trader Program with Mark Minervini. But for now, let's get back right to it with Mark and Mark.
Okay, welcome back. 2022 Master Trader Program. Here with Mark Ritchie, and of course, we just finished post analysis, going over post analysis, building a report card, quantifying your findings in the post analysis. Now we're going to go into what I call mind blowing math. I know, Mark, this is one of your favorite sections, and so moving forward into this, and also, by the way, tomorrow we have live trading, of course, as you know, and that'll be exciting, and hopefully we'll find some trades to put on. We're also going to be looking at the MarketSmith platform and doing some screening and show you how Mark and I screen for stocks. And we have Scott Sinclair from MarketSmith that's going to be here, IBD, going to be talking about that too, and helping us navigate the MarketSmith platform. So that should be a lot of fun and loaded with knowledge. So let's move on here to we're on slide number 488, and this particular slide may not be the best way to illustrate what I'm about to point I'm about to drive home, but it's the best that I could come up with over the last few years. I've been trying to think of a way maybe to do this another way, but I'm trying to really illustrate something very graphically here so you can grasp this. So let's start off by just explaining what these dots are. All these little dots represent trades. Okay, so the green ones are profitable trades, the red dots are losses. And the average, or there's 124 of these dots. There's 124 trades. Half of them are gains, half of them are losses, which would mean you're 50% profitable. This would be, if we were to take your trades and plot them like this, it would mean it would be a batting average of 50%. So the average gain, as far as the green dots, they represent an average gain of 12.5%. The red dots represent an average loss of 6.25. Doesn't really matter what would be assigned to each dot individually. The average gain, 12.5 versus 6.25, is 2 to 1. So 2 to 1 at 50% batting average is a 2 to 1 trader. This would be getting that $2 for risking one, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to calculate a return based on this scatter plot, if you will, and base it on a 25% position size in each of these trades and 25% exposure, never more than 25% exposure. So how this would be in the real world is if you went and you had $100,000, you took $25,000 of your money, you bought a stock, right? You made 12.5%, took your profit, bought another stock, lost 6.25% in whatever order, or average that over the life of these 124 trades, and never once did you ever go and dip into that 75% cash. If you had done that, okay, and you did it 124 times, you'd have about 100% return. 96.5% would be your return over these 124 trades. So now I'm gonna draw some little circles around each set of 4 trades, which will be 2 gains, 2 losses. And now we're going to shift to the same scenario, same profit, same loss, same number of trades, same exact trades. The only difference is now you're allowed to buy 4 stocks and go up to 100% invested until you buy the next 4. Previously, you couldn't buy another stock until you sold that 25% position and you maintain 75% cash. Now, if 4 stocks happen to set up, you buy one, another one sets up, you can go up to 100% exposure in this example. So now with the same exact position sizing, 25%, but going fully invested, having the same 124 trades, 50% profitable, average gain 12.5, average loss 6.25. What is your return now? That's the question. What is your return now? Mark, what would the return be now that we've moved up to 100% exposure?
It's going to be the same.
It's going to be the same. How could that be? We've quadrupled our exposure. Well, here's the thing. So we're still getting off 124 trades. So how we talked about earlier about how everything's going to distribute over a bell curve. This is going to come down to your average gain minus your average loss by how many times you can turn that over. And it doesn't really matter if you go fully invested, if you were to do them one at a time. Basically, you can think of it this way. If you were to go from New York to California, if you drove straight through or if you stopped along the way, same amount of miles, same amount of gas, right? So the only difference is, of course, is you might be able to get there quicker because now you're not waiting to get to that next trade to get off those 124 trades. There'd be more time, right? So there might be some opportunity cost there. But bottom line is that as long as you can get off that 124 trades, let's just say I gave you a year to get off 124 trades with these metrics. As long as you can get off 124 trades, it wouldn't matter if you were 75% cash the entire year, or if you went fully invested and put on that, much more risk, you'd still get the exact same result. So as we move along, you'll see how this is very important. So that's the first thing. So now, a lot of people think that to get to a big return, that you have got to have these big winners, and also that you have to be exposed. You have to have big exposure. Mark, going back and looking at your trading in the last 13 years or so, what's your average exposure like over time? What do you think your average exposure is?
Yeah, it's less than 50%. It's I haven't run it say with this last year because I've had even more cash. So it's probably even on average a little bit lower. But to bring home a little bit on that last slide too, the point being that the return's going to be the same, but it might just take you a little longer to get there if you only allow yourself one trade versus say 4 at a time or more. But yeah, one of the biggest misnomers in my view with big performance is that people think you have to be taking huge exposure all the time. And yeah, I've had periods where I've done nothing and on average have been held more of my money, say in cash on more than 50% in cash on average, over the last, say, 12, 13 years.
Right. So, and my trading has been the same. I average that where I'm in cash half the time or more. So I'm not in the market all the time, and I'm not taking that big risk on average. Yes, there's times where I move it up and we're heavily invested. But the point we're going to show you here is that not only do you not have to be in the market all the time, but you also don't have to have big giant winners. Mark has had great performance over more than a decade. I'm going on 4 decades of trading, and I have not made my return on getting, finding the next Amazon. And as we talked about earlier, and we're going to talk about opportunity cost here in a little bit, there's only so many stocks that go up 100%, 200%, 500%. You start getting into thousands of percent and tens of thousands of percent. There's only a handful of names that do that. And on top of it, in any one year, this is all about being consistent. The key to having big performance is consistency, is to be able to put down a big return year after year, or at least a decent return year after year. You can get there. You can get there with having a big giant winner and having a few stocks account for this big win, and you've found the next Netflix or Amazon or Google. But that's not something that's reliable, that you can do reliably, consistently, year in, year out. And it may be decades before that even happens, or it may take decades where you've got to go through huge drawdowns to get that big gain. So I decided that I don't want to take that. I want to make absolutely certain. When I first started trading, I was poor and I wanted to be rich, but I wanted to make absolutely certain that I got there. I didn't want to guess or throw darts and take chances. I wanted to create as much certainty as possible, and that's how we got to this strategy. And I'm going to show you how you can get there, and not only in a pretty certain fashion, but with not nearly as much work and as much risk that you would think. That it's much, much easier to get to that triple digit return than that most people would ever think. So let's again, we're doing a lot of math here through this whole risk management section, and now in mind-blowing math. Let's look at some math here. So here's another example I want you to put in your mind. So out of a year, all right, let's call it about 253 days are in a year. We'll even say we're going to even use 253 trades. You can either use days or trades. In this example, it's assuming that we are going to be either out of the market for 216 days out of the total trading days of the year. We're going to be out, or we're going to break even. So it doesn't matter if we make 100%, 50% return, and we lose 50%. It's all going to wash out over those days as a break even, or obviously if we were out of the market all those days, we would be break even, right? We wouldn't be up or down. So just think of it as you're either break even or you've stayed out all those days. Out of that entire time, we'll call it a year, 253 days, 253 trades, however you want to call it. We're going to assume that we've only traded on 37 of those days. And on those days, we've captured 2% of our equity. We made a 2% return. That's about 14% of the time. So we're in the market about 14% of the time. Now, to get that may sound like, wow, 2%. That's a big return on your capital in any one day or 1 week. Well, that equates to, if you took a 25% position, let's go backwards to the first example of 25% position sizing, 75% cash. Let's assume that that's the way we're approaching it. 75% cash, 25% position sizes. Well, we would have to find a stock that went up 8%. Okay. The stock went up 8%. We took a 25% position. That's 2%. That's 10% would be 2.5%, obviously. So it's 2%. You'd make 2% on your overall account. Do that 37 times, whether it's over 37 days, however you want to calculate it. Do that 37 times in a year and just break even the rest of the time, and you make 107%. Okay. So now the question is, can you find a stock that goes up 8% on a 25% position size, make 8% 37 times in an entire year, and the rest of the time just break even or stay out of the market? If you can do that, you double your account. Doesn't sound nearly as hard as finding the next Amazon, does it? So let's just go down to the numbers and let's break it down to what I call breaking it down to the ridiculous, where, okay, so we take it down to 10% of the time. What if we could only find 27 stocks that did that? We'd make 70%. What if we could only find 17 stocks that did that? We'd make 40%. And even if we only found 13 stocks and traded 13 days, that's 5% of the trades, or 5% of the days. So let's just say we do 253 trades. Out of 253 trades, I'm asking you to find 13 trades that go up 8%. And the rest of the entire time you trade, in the entire period that it takes to do on 253 trades or 253 days a year, in all that time, to either stay out of the market or break even. So you can still be shooting for that 8%. And if you miss it, you just got to break even. That's the main thing, is that you just offset your losses and you break even all that time. So by just treading water 95% of the time and only 5% of the time finding a stock that goes up 8%, 13 stocks out of a year, you will capture that 2%. You'll make 30%. That would put you, if you made 30% a year, that would literally put you at the top of the performers, like the best performers in the history of the stock market. That would put you at the best hedge funds and the best money managers in history. And that's very doable. So now, in all of this, right, just keep in mind, you never position size more than 25%. You're 75% cash the entire time. And your gain was only 8% on a 25% position. You didn't have to find a 20% winner, a 50% winner, or you averaged 8%. It doesn't matter whether every trade was 8% and you sold them at 8%, or you averaged 8%. Same number is going to come out. So the question is, how many stocks can you find that go up 8% while breaking even the rest of the time. If it's 13, you make 30%. If it's 17, you make 40, and you can go on and on. You can do this math. And if you can find more than 37, then you'll make more than 107%. Okay. I've had years where I've been up over 400%. Of course, 2021 won the U.S. Investing Championship, up 340 some odd percent. Mark, you were, was it 2020? I can't remember what's the last year you had you had a much bigger return than me that year. You're up over 300%, right?
Yes, in one of the stock accounts, correct. And I would just say, the way this distribution is gonna happen is precisely the way Mark just described. There will be years where you will find a lot more. This is back to even the previous section. This is precisely why in periods where you're not finding much, the goal, if you can just tread water, you're going to do really, really well. That's the goal in periods when you're not finding ideas is just to tread water, because when you are, the numbers become really, really powerful. I would just add too, if you just run a compounding calculator, 30% a year, take $10,000 and compound 30% a year. You will become a millionaire faster than you think, starting with a small amount of money. And that's at 30%. To Mark's point, in good periods, you should be aiming to do much better.
Yeah, and the goal of this exercise, if we will, or this part of the workshop here, this presentation, is to show you a few things. One is to take the pressure off of you that you think that you have to be invested all the time, or if the Dow's going up, and you're not in stocks that have this FOMO. This is a big weapon against FOMO. When you start realizing, see, again, when you look at the math, when you really look at the math and you break it down, this is where just doing a few things right and minimizing catastrophes and you can even have lots of losses. They just have to be offset. They're offset by gains. Even if your losses, if your losses are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%, if you're just offsetting them and breaking even most of the time, compounding dictates that you don't need a very big return on any one trade. And as long as, and position sizing, 25% may sound like a large position size, but if you're doing it with very, precise timing and keeping your losses small, and you're keeping 75% in the coffers of cash, it's actually very low risk, extremely, extremely low risk. Now, of course, imagine if you move up to 100% invested in the times where things are working really well. See, all this goes together, all right? We're going to still be using progressive exposure. So when the trades are working and you start moving that exposure up, well, now this math, this is exponential. You've just, turbocharged and compounding this math even more. The key is the downside. The downside is to keep your trading and the losses small and use progressive exposure on the downside. But if you just stayed at that conservative level all the time and you never ratcheted yourself up, you still could get there very easily. All right. But the key is you've got to protect the downside. And as long as you protect that downside and you're not, this is where, again, and I'm sure some light bulbs are going off big time right now. This is probably the most enlightening section of the whole workshop. And that's why I end with it, is that now you can see how losses work geometrically against you, and they destroy everything. That if compounding, well, you can make a lot of money with a small, with a small effort, but it's the losses that destroy the return. Now, if you keep your losses small at that 25%, this slide, I don't even remember where this slide came from. It came from somebody. I don't know if I took it off of Twitter. I can't remember, but this is sort of a slide that was donated to me, and I can't remember where it came from. If anybody knows, let me know, because I'd like to give credit. I can't remember where it even came from. So this is just simply looking at 15 losing trades in a row. And basically, this is sort of built around the premise of sort of how Mark and I will enter the market from cash, where we'll usually come in maybe 25% of our capital, take some positions, maybe some 5% positions, 5% positions, and put on those trades. And if things aren't working, then we stay small. We certainly don't get trade larger, or we might even cut the size down. But at that 25%, your downside, even if as long as you're keeping the losses to a minimum here, your downside is very limited. if you're stopping out, this is 15 losses in a row, and you're keeping that a risk of total equity, you can lose 15, 20 trades in a row, and you might lose 5, 6, 7%, which is very recoverable. And now, this is without using, any progressive exposure. This is staying at the same size and keeping that 25% position size. So now, if I had 5 or 6 or 7 trades in a row that went bad, Mark, I mean, are you going to just, you get 5, 10 trades in a row? Are you going to just keep trading the same size and the same exposure?
No, not at all. I've shrunk to sizes that almost seem meaningless. And it's, again, to take this, even to wall that thing off in terms of that prior section where we talked about creating that wall where you have control over the stops and the sizes. Those are the only two things you sort of control. So when they're not going well, I continue to tighten up the stop and shrink the size.
Right. And so, again, Mark, you've had over 13 years, your largest drawdown, your annual drawdown, has been 6%, and the other 2 drawdowns, you only had 3 down years, and your other 2 drawdowns were 5%. So incredible risk control. So can you just elaborate a little more? Let's sort of summarize here of what we talked about through these 4 days, and then how you've used that, and what's the most important things that everybody needs to know to achieve that, limited downside.
Well, the first is this slide's really important because it just goes to show, in terms of, this is without progressive exposure, to Mark's previous point, how assuming that you have, 3 different sort of forays, or I almost call it like campaigns into the market, where things don't go well, and if you're using, risk, this is a bad scenario, you're only down 6%, or 5.88. But what a lot of people don't understand is if you do this properly, what you can make in terms of, you only have to time it right one time to make up for all 3 of these periods and then some. So let's say this is pretty close to what's happening to me this year. And a lot of folks ask me, how do you feel? And have you lost your confidence? And does the strategy not work anymore? And I'm saying, no, the strategy works like a charm. Nothing's going right, and I'm barely down.
Yeah. And you see, the other thing too is, by looking at this math, you can also realize that you don't have to be in a hurry. Like, you can ramp up very quickly. I think that's another thing, Mark, you should talk about, or we should talk about. I just noticed also you changed to Trisha again. I don't know how that happened. Yeah. Anyway, your Zoom just wants to be your wife for some
wants to be my wife for some reason.
Anyway, so one of the things, like Mark, you just said that people ask you, are you nervous? Does the strategy work? See, when you look at the math behind this, you realize that you could also make up lost ground. When I say lost ground, I don't mean make up losses. I mean, let's just say the Dow takes off, and you're not invested, and it's up 20%. You can catch up to the market, and you can get a return, put a return down very quickly, because you're small, and you can take these larger position sizes. You're very nimble. You can move quickly. This is something that a big manager can't do. When they have hundreds of stocks and the position sizes are minuscule, they're basically mimicking the market and just beating it by a little bit. And if they get behind the market, it's very hard to ever make that up and to outperform the market. Once a manager gets far behind the market, he's pretty much done. This happened to go back to the Janus 20 in the 1990s. They were outperforming so well, and then everything just fell apart. Someone like Kathy Wood might be an example now, where just falling back so far here. It's very hard once they fall behind the averages to then make that up. But as an individual investor, you can do that in a heartbeat. I should also point out, because I forgot to tell you, that this particular slide is based on 5% positions, 25% exposure of me. This is sort of, again, like I said, typical of how I would enter the market. With that 25% exposure, could be 1 stock, or it could be 5 stocks, where I break it down into 5% positions, and this is with an 8% loss. So this is, if you broke that down, you took your first position was maybe 5% and you lost on that and you kept taking 5% positions, or you put them all on at once and everything broke out in one day. And this is at a maximum 8% loss. So again, obviously, if you were 25% position sizes, it would just be a few trades. But this is sort of how Mark and I would enter the market and from cash and keep that exposure down to that 25%. So not only with that example of us having the 25% exposure on each stock, we'd go lower than that and we'd work our way up to that. We wouldn't just come right into that, but you could. You certainly could.
What this just allows people to do too is retain your confidence along with your capital. And to Mark's point too, once you really get into those bigger drawdowns, and you mentioned Kathy Wood, there's a poster child for drawdowns that are just way too big. She's down 70+% this year, and that's on an ETF. I mean, that's just a disaster. If you didn't learn in the last section that, you're probably not going to come back from that, and your confidence is blown to smithereens. But, in this scenario, again, you've got things going about as bad as they can go, and you're barely down. Think about that. That's like, if you played a sport and you can't hit a shot to save your life, and it's like you're only down 2 points at halftime. You got to be saying to yourself, all I have to do is play a little bit better and I'm back in the lead. And that's precisely to Mark's point, in very short order then, when things turn. And again, like we've said a few other times, these periods of wins and losses sometimes come in bunches. And then when you start seeing waves of setups, you can ramp things up very quickly. And so if you come in with 2% initial risk, think of it this way. I'm often trying to make 5 to 10 times my initial risk in any one short window, if I really time it right. So that means, 10 to 20% is kind of what I'm thinking. If I start out with 2, well, it only takes one good period then for me to immediately make up these 3 bad periods and then some.
Yeah, I always say, if you like in football, a team with a good defense is very hard to ever, I bet on the teams with really good defenses because it's hard to lose. Someone can't score against you. Of course, you have to put points on the board. But here's the key, and this, you sparked this thought for me, Mark. We're talking about that analogy. Think of it as you got Tom Brady as the quarterback, right? And you've got this phenomenal defense. So you're putting yourself in a position to where when stocks turn and things are going well, that you are in a position to move the ball down the field very quickly. Now, Tom Brady can move that ball down the field very fast and strike at a moment's notice, but you've walled the other side where you can't score against them. And that's the winning formula. The winning formula is to be able to have that upside. You're exposing yourself to the upside. The upside is present. All right. You may not know exactly when the upside is going to, the opportunity is going to present itself and when you can take advantage of it. But as long as you protect the downside and that opportunity is present, you've created that asymmetric leverage. And that's the key here. Now, let me get into, we're going to talk about compounding a little bit and what I call the power factor of understanding compounding and again, understanding why we want to always be thinking risk reward. If you remember going back to a slide where I said, now that you're up 40%, would you sell the stock up 70, but you hold it down 30? Well, now, yeah, it sounds good. You're 70%, but no, you've actually let a bigger loss. You've laid odds now. You're not getting odds on your money from that point. So when you think about compounding, this is where this really starts to come in, and you've got to understand that you've always got to think in terms of risk versus reward wherever the trade is, even after you own it and you're at a profit, because compounding works great. It works amazing. And I'm going to show you in a second. I call it the power factor, but it also works on the downside. So but if you can cut the downside off at all times and constantly put yourself in a position to have compounding work on the upside, it is absolutely amazing. So I tweeted this in 2021. I said, the power of compounding is amazing. Consider this. Was right in the middle of the U.S. Investing Championship. It was when I was up 277% during the I guess the later stages, October of the contest. I said, I'm currently up 277%. That's 23% away from 300%, right? Wrong. I only need a 6.2% gain to get to 300%. If I return 23%, I would have a total return of 363.7%. Do the math. That's what I call the power factor. So once you get up, the more you get up, the easier it is to get up more, right? Because you're compounding, but it also works on the downside. But let's look at the upside. Let's look at the power factor. So you start with $100, a basis of $100,000, whatever you want to call it, and you make 30%. Okay, so now 30%, you make 30%, you make $30,000. You make $30 on 100, right? It's 30 for 30, for lack of a better way to express it. But now you've got 130, right? And now you make 30% on that 130. Well, that's 1.3 times the 30, that you're getting $39 on your 100, because that's your starting point, is the 100, right? So that's adding 39% to your return. You now have a 69% return. So now, of course, and those of you who understand compounding, this is very, very basic, but it's important to understand the power of from those levels moving up, and always capping that downside even when you're already up. That the power factor works if you constantly create asymmetric leverage. You have to think not just from the starting point, but always thinking risk versus reward and maintaining asymmetric leverage. So now when you have $169, right, or $169,000 from $100,000, well, now you get another trade. We'll call it another trade, 30%, or another year, 30% return. You put 30% on top of that, it's 1.7 times, because now you're getting that 30% actually equates to 50.7% on your original $100, or your 100 basis. You're starting at your basis of 100, and move it up again, and now it's 2.2 times. You're getting 65.91, and on and on and on. So that's how, of course, you get big returns, because it's compounding. But that compounding works the same on the downside. So you've got to cut off the downside. Think of it as the same premise of buying a stock, letting your winners run and cutting your losses, right? You're putting yourself, if you're putting yourself in a position to make a big move. So let's just say, we've pre-selected a bunch of random stocks that we already know the return, and in there, a couple of them are going to go up 100%. One of them is going to go up 500%. Some of them are going to go down to 0. Some are going to go down 50%, and the rest of them are going to go up between, I don't know, 10, 20% and single digits. Okay, so now we've got this list, and we throw darts at it, right? If the list, if that probability is, say, 50-50, and we throw darts at it randomly, we're going to hit both sides of the equation. But what if we just walled off the bottom and said, okay, well, the 50% decliner can never hit me for 50%, because I'm capped at 10, but I'm still shooting darts at the side that has the 500%er, the 100%er, right? So at some point, I'm going to hit those. I created asymmetric leverage. This is the way you have to think at all times. At all times. And this is how people, they get into, it's the same thing with gamblers. They're playing blackjack, and they get a bunch of chips, and now they start betting heavy, and before you know it, all the chips are gone. Jesse Livermore said, the quickest way to, losing is poor speculation and thinking that you have house money, and now you can shoot for the moon. So it's not house money. Once you make money and you make a return, it's your money, even if you didn't sell it. And you need to protect it. You need to think in these terms. All right. Now, here's another thing that you have to think about at all times is that, and Mark, you said this early on, that there's some little things. There's some just little changes can make a big difference. And what we've shown you is a lot of little things. And when you take all these little things and you put them all together, it's monumental. It is absolutely monumental, and there's not that many things to orchestrate here. But there is a list. All right, there are some things, and one of them, and this is what I call saving bets. This is a term in poker where most poker players, where they lose their money, is not in. It's not in losing any one big pot as much as it is in all the bets that they make that they shouldn't be making. All the calls that they shouldn't be making, the extra $20 and $5 and $50 that they throw in the pot that they shouldn't be making. When you add all that up and you see all the excess of it, it's the same thing in business, where like maybe you have a hamburger stand, or in my family we had for generations pizza restaurants, and my brother would always say, if a guy had a heavy cheese hand, he'd kill him. He'd kill the business because they put a lot of cheese on. The cheese was really expensive. So in saving bets, this is about where, again, you got to think of the totality. You're not just going to make one trade. You're going to make lots of trades. So if you start buying stocks that move up and they get extended, and you say, well, I'm just going to break the rule a little bit, and I know Mark Minervini says to only pay up 1%, but this one's up, 2 or 3, it's okay. Well, if you just in that little bit of lost percentage that you have just on the buy side alone, it could add up. Just say trader A buys a stock at 2020, right? The buy point's at $20. 2020 is 1% above the buy point. So trader A says, I'm not buying more than 1%. Trader B buys a couple percent, a few percent above, right? So, and now both those traders sell the stock at the same point. Let's just call it 6% on average. If you did that a couple hundred times, trader A makes 67% more than trader B. And that's just losing 1% on one side of the trade. Now you come in, on the sell side, the slippage, you start bringing all those factors in, and it all adds up. It all adds
there
up.
There should be a golden nugget on this page, because I think most folks just don't understand that, again, to our previous point, how you're not going to make one trade. So you've got to think about this in a series of hundreds, if not ideally, maybe thousands of trades that, yeah, those add up. And you want to let this, again, work its way into your trading. So every time you're tempted to make a sloppy buy, to let a stop, get away from you, every single one of these adds up. And yeah, we're talking, 40 cents here. The difference, most people think, what's the difference? And hey, they both made money, right? They both sold at a profit. So I guess it doesn't matter. It's a monumental difference over time. And I think your analogy to running a pizza chain or any successful business, they will tell you, when you compare two businesses, one that's very successful and one that's barely profitable, it's usually they're doing many small things a little bit better than their competitor.
In the food business, it's all about portion control, of being consistent in the portion control and the waste. You can get murdered on waste, on just, employees wasting, putting too much product, giving customers extra this or that, extra cups. And so these are the things that really good business people track and minimize, and have systems to make sure that there's a process, that everything's very accurate. So the same with trading, it's no different than any ordinary business. You got to think, merchandise or stocks, you need to make more on your winners than your losers. On the merchandise that you sell, you basically got to pay less than you, of course, obviously, than you sell the product for. Minimize waste. The reason why I'm bringing all this to you, and we're finishing with this, is one word: discipline. To pound into your head that you've got to be disciplined, and no just this one-time moments. Everything is discipline. All this is quantified for you. You've now got to stick to the rules. You've got to build your skill, and then you've got to build your discipline, which is that's the bottom line. Because there's a lot of people out there that have skill and they just don't have discipline. The world is littered with natural talent that never made it because they didn't have the discipline. This is in sports and anything, and it's no different in trading. You got to stick to the rules and not skip steps. I heard Mark Ritchie say that before. Don't skip steps.
One of the things I'll add to that, Mark, that something my dad taught me when I was young that applies, is the idea that talent and smarts often gets the credit or the glory, but it's discipline that ultimately gets the job done.
Absolutely. Now, opportunity cost. This is what we talked about earlier. And just again, looking at the math, you can get to 100% return if you had 8 stocks that went up 10%, or ROI, we call it, return on equity. If you put your whole account into a stock and you made 10% on it, you could find a stock that went up 10% 8 times in whatever period of time, a year, whatever you'd want to accomplish 114%. That's all you need to do is find a stock that goes up 10% 8 times and you're up 114%, right? So now again, I showed you how doing that with a 25% position X amount of times and breaking even the rest of the time doesn't seem so hard to get to those triple digit returns, right? Maybe that's why I've gotten triple digit returns in many, many, many years out of my career. That's how I've done it. Because see, again, it's not that I'm not trying to get a bigger move out of the stock, but if I didn't, this is really a golden key point. And this is something that, if you remember, Mark, I talked to you about years ago and said that this can get me there on its own. So that bigger move in the stock, that's just gravy. All right. I'm in a position though to get to my goal. Like I said before, I don't want to. There was a saying we used to have. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. we used to say, well, when we go to a fight to have a fight with the kids, we go have fist fights. We'd say, I came here to win. I didn't came here to see if I didn't come here to see if I could win. You know, you prepare, you know, to win, not to see if you can win. And so I came into this business not to see if I can win. I came in this business to win. All right. And to come up with a method that I am certain I'm going to get there virtually with certainty. And again, so with this, I know the opportunity cost. I'm not there. There's always a stock that goes up 8 or 10% every year. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stocks that go up. So that opportunity is always there. So it would take me 20% gains to get that same gain pretty much as 10% gains. It would take me 100% gain. Now I might get there a lot faster. You know, I might get there with just one trade. Yes, with 100% gainer. How many stocks go up 100%? How often can you do that? And can you do that year in and year out? Consistency, right? What can you do over? So do I want to find the 100% winner? Absolutely. That would be great to buy the stock, have it go up, not hit my stop, sit back and enjoy the ride. We can do that, but we also have to realize there's a lot of noise in between, and there's a lot of times where you don't have that opportunity. So this is where I'm going to show how to get there for sure. Okay. And still have all that upside on top of it, but still get the amazing returns, even if it didn't happen, even if you never found those big winners. Now, I didn't just get to this by accident. All these conclusions didn't just happen by accident. This is not only 40 years of trading, but analyzing thousands of traders. I've had hundreds of people work for me. I've trained tens of thousands of people. There's such a huge pool of information that this all came from, and studying stock trades and stock trading before me for 60, 70 years before I even traded. So we ran a study. This is from a study from a long time ago that we ran, that we wanted to look at the opportunity cost and figure out, okay, is it really worth it to short-term trade? And so what we did was we found out how many opportunities do you have coming out of these bases, breaking out, coming from cheats and low cheats and so forth, and breakout trades, and how far these stocks went up. And if you were able to capture the returns, if you were to get, in an X amount of time, you made 50% or 100%, but taking time into the equation and figuring out, is there an opportunity cost? Are you giving up the opportunity where you could be compounding and using that money more effectively? Okay, so for instance, if you were to buy a house and you held it for 10 years and you doubled your money, okay, that's great, right? So, but what if you could have flipped houses? You flipped houses each year. You flipped houses and you made a smaller profit, but then over that 10 years, maybe you made 3 times your money or 5 times your money or more. Where is the sweet spot on that is what we wanted to know. So I've run lots of studies on this based on stocks breaking out from the breakout level and how much time it takes to get to a 10, a 20% gain, a 50% gain, these larger gains. What we found is after the 15%, it rolls off. All right. Your sweet spot is that 5 to 15%, meaning that there's enough opportunities to turn over to make up for than if you waited for a bigger return. Then the next area was 15 to 35, 40%, and then it rolled off. When you start getting into the 40, 50% and greater, it really rolled off because there are just not many opportunities that happen each year. So bottom line is this was a big argument for shorter term trading. And I did this particular study is actually that you're seeing here. I've done this on many cycles and periods over my career, but this goes back to early on. That's why I pulled this up. This was like one of my original studies back in the 90s, where I was considering getting much shorter term trading because commissions came down, and it facilitated shorter term trading. Prior to that, we couldn't short term trade. We had to pick up the phone, we had to call someone. There was big commissions, wide spreads. So everything came down where the commissions were much less, and then we could put on our orders online. We had online trading. That made short-term trading, all of a sudden they had the SOS bandits and people started short-term trading. And I said, okay, well, I don't want to just speculate that short-term trading is a better way. I want to actually see, what would happen. This is the study. This came from that study, and then we've improved upon it, of course, over the years, and studied even further. And basically, it keeps bearing out the same information that 5 to 15, 20% range, and then that 15 to 35, 40% range, and then above that going into the 50% and above. And that even bears out with the power plays. Remember, Mark, we found that sort of like in that first 50, 60 days, you get a big chunk of your return on those power plays. And then for it to go on to be a much bigger winner, it really, the probability really rolls off. And you could get one that, it's the next, whatever, like, Syntex with the birth control pill back in the 60s. That was one of O'Neill's stocks that was a power play, a high tight flag that he played that went on to be a gigantic winner. But the probabilities roll off, and then it doesn't pay for itself there, because you can utilize that capital more efficiently by rolling it over into more trades. So that's sort of, that gives you your tranches, if you will. My whole goal for this whole thing is to give you the tools, give you the tactics, arm you with the knowledge, but also arm you with the data, and convince you that you can do this, that I'm not special, that I wasn't born with this talent. As a matter of fact, I sucked at this and was what I would call an unnatural. If there's a natural born trader, I was an unnatural. I think Mark Ritchie might have been born a natural trader. I do. I think he might have been born a natural trader. I was, as far as I've known him, I haven't known him since he was a child, but I was an unnatural trader. I did everything you could possibly do wrong. I had every kind of emotional hang up that you could think of about trading, and took forever to get this down. So convincing you that you can do this is the most important thing. Arming you with the data and showing you what's behind it is the second most important thing, because giving you the tools and tactics and strategy is all great, but you won't stick to it, and you won't be able to do it unless you see why it works and you understand why you can do it, and you're inspired to be able to stick through it and go through the learning curve. So lessons from mind-blowing math here should be, one, that you do not have to be in the market all the time. Now, as Mark just told you, and I told you, we're in the market on average about half the time or less. So 50% of the time or more, we're in cash, 100% cash. That doesn't mean if we get a bull market that's taken off, we might be fully invested for a year, or on and off, but certainly, and I might even be, in the old days, I used lots of margin. In the contest, I used margin. I don't use leverage anymore, but I needed to then. And when I was first starting out, I didn't have any money, I did use leverage. But even with that, even when I used leverage, I was not more than about 50% invested on average, and Mark too. And David Ryan would tell you the same thing. O'Neill, all of us, the same exact thing. You don't have to be fully invested. Okay, you don't, even when you're in the market, you don't have to be fully invested. Is what you have to do is get off X amount of trades. Do the math. How many trades is going to take me? What's your average gain? What's your average loss? What's your batting average? Then you bring in your position size, and that you can figure out exactly how many trades it's going to take you to get to your goal. So it doesn't matter if you were based on a 5% position size, you could be 95% cash. As long as if it was going to take you, let's say 300 trades at 5% position size, as long as you can get those 300 trades off in the amount of time that you have allotted that you want to achieve your goal. So let's call it 1 year. In 1 year, you want to be up 100%. Well, at 5% position sizes, whatever your metrics are, if you could get there with X amount of trades, then that's fine. As long as you can get them off in that amount of time, you could be 95% cash and never, ever be more than 5% invested. So it depends on your numbers. And that's the bottom line here. That's why this is all about math.
You'll guarantee that your drawdowns are much smaller. I think 1 and 2 on this list are really key for folks that maybe have listened to sort of a traditional mindset, because they're really philosophical, that really flies against conventional wisdom. How many times have you heard people saying, well, you have to be invested. You don't want to miss out on opportunity. I've been hearing that all year. You got to stay invested, because when this turns, you don't want to miss out. And now everyone's gotten clobbered. So where 1 and 2 to me these are bedrock, philosophical ways of thinking. And I think 3, 4, and 5 are really more letting the math and the probabilities and understanding those work their way into your trading.
Right. Number 3, you don't have to get big gains to have big returns. Super performance, triple-digit returns do not require triple-digit stock gains. All right. It requires compounding and turning that edge over. So, and compounding, remember the power, I call it the power factor. The power factor is when you compound, but you create asymmetric leverage within your compounding. So you're always thinking risk versus reward, even from profits. And very few people think that way in trading. This is something, and even in gambling, if you're a poker player, these are concepts that you can apply to anything in speculation, the math behind this. So compounding, you want to take advantage of compounding, but you have to realize that compounding works against you too. So you always have to be cutting off that downside relative to upside, and always getting odds on your money. Always get odds on your money. Saving bets, major game changer. Okay, you can't be sloppy with your tactics. You've got to get it where your discipline is near perfect, where you're buying right at that buy point and you're not chasing the stocks up. When the stock hits your stop, you're out. You're not vacillating, and you're executing with precision. And with the tools that we have today, with the type of bracketing orders and so forth, and you can put orders in with your brokerage firm and on the platforms, it's easier than ever. I mean, you can be absolutely precise. Again, I couldn't do that in the early days. What you read, everything you read about with me in Market Wizards, all those returns and winning the U.S. Investing Championship back then, most of that was picking up the phone, calling a broker. There was times where I didn't know what my execution was for 30 minutes. I didn't get a call back. And you'd call, and the phone would just ring and ring and ring. In fast markets, you'd call the trade desk, it would just ring forever. They wouldn't answer the phone. It was insanity. I mean, really, but that's the way it was, and we made money. Now, oh God, it's like you've got this. You're flying this F-16. We're flying a Piper Cub. You're flying F-16 fighter jets now, with fully automated. It's amazing. So you can do this even better than ever. When you put all this together, it creates a monumental, just everything we just talked about in this section, not to mention everything we talked about in 4 days. You put all this together, and then you can see how I've quantified virtually every aspect of this strategy and taken it down to a very fine point, to a surgical level, mathematically, technically, emotionally, and psychologically. I'm just gonna take a short break, okay, and we're gonna come back with some closing remarks. Just want to give you just a short break, and then we're going to come right back, and we're going to have some closing remarks, and we're going to wrap this up, and then we'll of course come back tomorrow with live trading. All right, we'll try to put all this into actual practice. All right, we'll be right back.
All right, guys, if that's not blowing your mind, I'm not sure what will, because that is the section I love personally the most, to really open your eyes to things and concepts that nobody ever knows or teaches in regards to trading. We're going to take a 5-minute break here. A quick note, again, I did have a few questions, comments. Love to hear or see your comments on social media. If you don't know, tweet or post or tag Mark or whatever all that is that you do. We love to see those comments and share with anyone what your experiences are with regard to that. So definitely you can do that. Just again, can't share any of the information or the content of what you're learning, but please feel free to go ahead and use Twitter. I know is predominantly the one that everybody uses, but if you're on Instagram, Facebook, whatever as well. With that said, I see a lot of posts, typing comments here. Glad you really enjoyed that. We will take a few break. We'll come back and have Mark do the final wrap up for the 2022 Master Trader Program Day 4. Reminder, the replay will be 6 o'clock tonight. Same login credentials, same link for the replay tonight. Let's reconvene in a few minutes.